It was 3 p.m. on a Friday. A doctor at an NHS hospital in the UK tries to check his email. Instead, the PC reboots into a scary red screen demanding $300 in Bitcoin. The date is May 12th, 2017, and pretty soon, almost every computer across the hospital system is going down. Staff begin scrambling to find pens and pencils. Ambulances are getting diverted, and appointments are canceled without warning. The hospital, full of sick patients and emergency situations, is now running on paper. But this isn't just one hospital. By the end of the weekend, a third of England's NHS hospital organizations are affected. At least 81 out of 236, plus 595 GP practices, with around 19,000 appointments canceled. But it gets worse. It isn't just the NHS. It isn't even just the UK. Telefonica in Spain, FedEx in the United States, and Renault in France, shutting down assembly lines. Railway departure boards in Germany flicker with the telltale red screen. Within about a day, ransomware has encrypted data on tens of thousands of computers in dozens of countries. The culprit, of course, is malware, and it has a name. At least now it does. WannaCry. So let's talk about who's to blame, what could have been done to prevent it, and most interestingly, how this virus actually worked. Stay with me, because WannaCry isn't just a story about a piece of malicious code. It's a story about leaked government cyber weapons, a patch that everyone ignored, and an industry built on legacy systems that can't be turned off. And of course, about a young man who accidentally became the most important sysadmin in the world for about 48 hours. But to understand this hack, you first need to understand what ransomware actually is. Ransomware is a piece of malicious software that, once installed on your machine with access to the file system, encrypts stuff that you care about. Your documents, your photos, your databases, maybe all that stuff. Now, that might sound like a good thing. The problem is it encrypts it with a key that only the attacker has access to. Then it pops up a ransom note demanding payment, usually in cryptocurrency, in exchange for getting your files back. To be on the receiving side of a ransomware attack is terrifying enough, but the stakes get even higher when those files are essential to treating and saving the lives of hospital patients. In the case of WannaCry, it demanded you pay $300 in Bitcoin within 3 days, and if you don't, the ransom doubles. Wait 7 days, and you lose your files forever. Now, ransomware exploded in the 2010s, possibly due in part to the invention of Bitcoin. See, cash is hard to extort. Wire transfers leave a paper trail, but a pseudonymous, borderless, irreversible cryptocurrency is a payment rail that lends itself particularly well to, hey, your business is down until you send us money. In 2017, most ransomware spread the boring way, through phishing. Some employee clicks a sketchy link in an email attachment, downloads and runs the program, and it's game over for that one machine. WannaCry was different. WannaCry didn't need anyone to do anything. It scanned for reachable machines over TCP port 445 and exploited a vulnerability in something called SMB, Server Message Block, the protocol that Windows machines use to share files and printers across a local network. Server Message Block is exactly the kind of boring corporate plumbing users never think about. The kind of thing that exists in the background of every office building, hospital, and government agency, doing the unglamorous work of letting Greg from accounting print his quarterly report on the third floor copier, which is also why it's the perfect place for an exploit. Once one machine inside a hospital was infected, every other vulnerable Windows machine on the same network was living on borrowed time. See, the worm self-propagated. Hospitals didn't get hit one workstation at a time. They got hit by a chain reaction. One vulnerable machine gets infected, the malware sees the network, the malware sees 300 other devices, and 60 seconds later, the building's down. Now, you might be thinking, wow, these hackers are geniuses. They must have come up with some new technique that changed ransomware forever. But the funny part is, they didn't even really build it. According to Microsoft, the exploit WannaCry used had actually been stolen from the NSA, National Security Administration. Now, before we get into how a US cyber weapon ends up on a hospital network in Stevenage, if this is the kind of story that makes you want to understand how the systems we all depend on actually work, you should check out boot.dev. We teach backend development, DevOps, and web security, the stuff that every professional working in tech should know. The kinds of fundamentals you need if you want to be the person who patches something like an SMB vulnerability instead of the person whose machine gets taken offline by it. We actually have a cryptography course that dives into symmetric and asymmetric encryption, hash functions, key derivations, all that good stuff. It's a great place to start for anyone who really wants to understand the primitives that keep us safe in our online work. And you can check out all of that lesson content for free, and if you're interested in upgrading to get unlimited access to Boot.dev's interactive features like progress tracking, instructor solutions, XP, leveling, and more, use code BOOTSTUBE for 25% off an annual membership. Now, back to the story. An elite offensive cyber unit, widely linked to the NSA, known as the Equation Group, had reportedly built or held an exploit for a serious vulnerability in Windows SMB. Internally, it had a code name, Eternal Blue. And it was useful exactly because it was secret. Eternal Blue let an attacker remotely execute code on an unpatched Windows machine running vulnerable SMB v1 services. No user interaction required, just by sending a malformed packet to the right port. So for an intelligence agency like the NSA, well, maybe they're not too worried about it being a vulnerability because they care about the fact that they have their skeleton key. In August of 2016, a group calling itself the Shadow Brokers claims to have stolen a trove of NSA hacking tools, and to this day, nobody knows their real identities. Maybe they had a rogue insider, or perhaps a foreign intelligence service hacked into an NSA jump server. Edward Snowden, the former NSA contractor famous for leaking information to the public about US government surveillance, he hinted at Russian responsibility. But the US government has never confirmed any of it, so we don't know for sure. So, fast forward to April 14th, 2017, the Shadow Brokers dump a fresh load of exploits onto the internet, with names like Eternal Romance, Eternal Champion, Fuzzbunch, Double Pulsar, and the one and only Eternal Blue. 1 month later, a group of criminals had welded Eternal Blue onto a piece of ransomware, creating WannaCry. So here's the obvious question. If the exploit was leaked publicly in April, surely Microsoft scrambled to patch it. Surely the world had a month to update their systems before the worm hit. Yes and no. Microsoft had actually shipped a fix a month before the leak. On March 14th, 2017, they released Security Bulletin MS17-010, which closed the SMB vulnerability that Eternal Blue depended on. By the time the public dump landed in April, the door was already supposed to be closed. So why, on May 12th, did WannaCry still tear through hundreds of thousands of computers? It's simple. Frankly, because enterprise patching is a complete nightmare. A hospital doesn't just run Windows. Broadly speaking, hospitals run connected medical devices, hospital networks, vendor-managed systems, and clinical workflows where cybersecurity risk can become patient safety risk. The point isn't that this exact hospital had this exact machine in this exact state. It's that things like MRI machines and infusion pumps are not laptops that you just casually reboot in the middle of a workday. Move fast and break things may be the Silicon Valley mantra for web development, but it's a bad idea for mission-critical software. So, for big enterprises like hospitals, it's not as easy as just clicking update. If you aren't careful, things break, and updates, therefore, tend to be manual. So in NHS hospitals specifically, a huge number of machines were running supported but unpatched Windows 7. Some were even running Windows XP, which Microsoft had stopped supporting in 2014. NHS Digital had actually issued patching alerts in March and April of 2017, but as the National Audit Office later noted, before the attack happened, the department had no formal mechanism for checking whether anyone had actually applied them. Spoiler, a lot of them hadn't. So, WannaCry hit, and Microsoft did something very out of the ordinary. Mid-attack on a Saturday, they emergency released patches for unsupported Windows versions, including Windows XP, Windows 8, and Windows Server 2003 to help stop the bleeding. But the worm was spreading too fast. Every infected machine was scanning their networks for more vulnerable machines, and every successful infection became a new launchpad. Enter the guy in his bedroom who was about to save countless files, dollars, and maybe even lives through his fix. Saturday morning, May 13th, in Ilfracombe, a coastal town in southwest Devon, a 22-year-old security researcher named Marcus Hutchins, better known online as Malware Tech, wakes up to a sample of WannaCry sitting in his inbox. Now, this is basically, by his own description, what he does on weekends. He tracks botnets and reverse engineers malware from his bedroom, meaning he actually wants to download malware samples on his quarantine system because he then reverse engineers them for fun. So he runs the sample he's given in a sandbox and watches what it does. And he notices something odd. Before WannaCry encrypts a single file, it tries to phone home to a long, gibberish-looking domain name. Hutchins checks the domain, and strangely enough, it's not even registered, let alone pointing to a specific IP address. So he registers it. It cost him $10.69. And with that $10, he had unknowingly just turned off the entire worm. Globally. Now, the infections didn't undo anything already encrypted, unfortunately stayed encrypted. But every new copy of WannaCry on every new machine started checking that domain. And now that the domain existed, it caused the malware to shut itself down before encrypting anything. It took hours and other researchers double-checking his work before it was clear what had actually happened. Hutchins later said he didn't even realize what he had done at first. One of his colleagues had to dig through the code and confirm that, yes, the random domain he bought was literally the kill switch. He spent the rest of the weekend with friends and colleagues taking shifts running the sinkhole. At one point, he said, a foreign government seized one of his servers thinking he was the WannaCry command and control. And the relevant code path was almost comically simple. At a high level, the behavior can be represented like this. I'm simplifying the Windows API calls here, of course, but this is basically the bug CISA documents. See, if the big nasty domain successfully responds, abort. Otherwise, start encrypting. And then, of course, spread to other machines. So you're probably thinking what I was thinking, which is, why would the criminals build a kill switch into their own ransomware? Are they just dumb? Well, kind of. I mean, it did make it trivial to stop the attack, but it's because the domain wasn't really intended to be used as a kill switch in the first place. We think it was an anti-sandbox check that backfired. See, a lot of malware analysis tools simulate the internet by responding successfully to a lookup on any domain. By having the worm bail out if some random nonsense URL is resolved, the authors hope to detect that they were running inside of a researcher's sandbox and abort. This would, at least in theory, make the malware harder to detect and reverse engineer. The criminals, to put it gently, did not anticipate that some kid in Devon would just buy the domain. This was not a coordinated government defense response. There was no cyber command war room saving the day. It was a particularly clever researcher with $10. And his $10 may have prevented far more damage. So we know who saved the day and how, but now how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? That's the question Brad Smith, Microsoft's president, tried to answer in a now famous blog post 2 days after the attack. His argument was blunt. If governments are going to stockpile vulnerabilities in commercial software for offensive operations, then sooner or later those stockpiles are going to leak. And when they leak, civilians are the ones who pay. He compared it to the US military having a handful of its Tomahawk missiles stolen. Smith called for a digital Geneva Convention, an agreement that governments would report vulnerabilities to vendors instead of hoarding them. But has anything actually changed since 2017? Well, not really. Governments still stockpile vulnerabilities. Stockpiles still leak. A few weeks later, NotPetya, the destructive 2017 cyber attack initially aimed at Ukraine, spread worldwide and caused billions of dollars in damage across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, according to the White House. Same basic lesson, same kind of Windows enterprise blast radius. Different malware. Then in August 2018, more than a year after WannaCry, a variant of the same ransomware crawled into the chip fabrication facilities of TSMC, the world's largest semiconductor foundry, and forced multiple production lines offline. A piece of 2017 malware was still tearing through Windows machines inside the most advanced chip plants on planet Earth. But what about the criminals who actually built WannaCry? Whatever happened to them? Well, in December of 2017, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Japan, and Denmark publicly attributed WannaCry to North Korea's Lazarus Group. US authorities named one of those alleged operators, Park Jin-hyuk, as part of a Reconnaissance General Bureau conspiracy that private researchers have labeled Lazarus Group and APT-38. Alongside Park, US authorities also named two more alleged North Korean hackers, John Chang-hyuk and Kim Il, as alleged participants in the same RGB-linked conspiracy. So, how much money did they actually make from WannaCry? Turns out, only about $143,000 in Bitcoin. Not even the average salary of a back-end developer in the United States. It's really not a whole lot for a piece of malware that infected hundreds of thousands of machines, crippled hospitals, and disrupted train departure boards. Their payday was a pittance for two reasons. One, the kill switch nuked the campaign before most victims even had time to pay. Two, the payment and decryption logic in WannaCry was also buggy. So officials warned that paying the ransom didn't even guarantee files would be released in the first place. Effectively, WannaCry, the most famous ransomware attack probably in history, was a financial flop. The criminals barely cleared 6 figures. It looks, on the surface, like a story with a happy ending. A researcher unwittingly saves the world, the attackers barely profit, and world governments eventually attribute the attack and name some alleged operators. But unfortunately, things do get darker from here. Because ransomware as an industry after WannaCry did not disappear. It exploded in growth. By 2023, ransomware payments crossed $1 billion in cryptocurrency for the first time, at least according to Chainalysis. Depressingly, ransomware as a service is kind of a thing now, complete with affiliate programs, initial access brokers, and off-the-shelf tools that make it easier for less technical criminals to launch attacks. Lockbit alone provided ransomware as a service to a global network of affiliates, and the UK's National Crime Agency says more than 7,000 attacks were built using its services between June 2022 and February 2024. Hospitals are still getting hit. Pipelines are still getting hit. City governments are still getting hit. And the most uncomfortable thing about all these stories is that they all rhyme with the same institutional weakness WannaCry exposed in 2017. Old systems that nobody can afford to turn off. In May 2019, the city of Baltimore was infected with ransomware called Robinhood. The New York Times initially reported that Eternal Blue had been used in the spread, which would have been a poetic horror. A literal NSA exploit 2 years after WannaCry, still circulating, still taking down a major American city. But subsequent forensic analysis disputed that claim. Malware analyst Joe Stewart told Krebs on Security, the Robinhood binary had no Eternal Blue exploit code and no means of spreading across networks on its own. But the underlying point remains. Even years later, Eternal Blue was still the kind of old, patched vulnerability defenders have to worry about. 6 years after WannaCry, in October of 2023, the British Library, the National Library of the United Kingdom, was hit by a ransomware group called Resida. The library later described it as a deeply damaging criminal attack that caused a loss of control of some personal data. The disruption knocked major services offline for months. The library's own instance review pointed out the usual story: historic reliance on complex legacy infrastructure, uneven security controls, and a slow path back to full recovery. So no, the vulnerability of major institutions to determined criminal crews has not been meaningfully fixed since 2017. Cyber extortion has only gotten more lucrative, more professional, and more frequent. Now, we all hear so often about how tech is changing everything so fast. Everything's going to be automated, software is a solved problem, and yet a massive chunk of the world's tech infrastructure is actually unbelievably old and decrepit. Don't underestimate how slow large enterprises and government organizations can be to change. The most unsettling thing of the aftermath to me is that our best practices weren't what saved us. An accident did. Marcus Hutchins didn't have a contract with the UK government. He had a sandbox, a hunch, and a few dollars to spend on a domain name. Our last line of defense between a global cyber attack escalating into Monday morning, when people would turn their work computers back on and that attack stalling out over the weekend, was one researcher noticing one weird domain in one network request. If anything, the outlook has gotten more complicated since. There are more connected medical devices, more internet-dependent industrial systems, more legacy software, and more attackers working with better tools in a more mature criminal economy. Many major institutions still have some version of the WannaCry problem sitting somewhere inside of them. A leaked exploit nobody patched, a vendor-managed system that's really hard to update, or a critical piece of software written by a disgruntled COBOL engineer who quit back in 2019. We can hope that next time a researcher catches it as fast as Hutchins did. Or, here's an idea, we can care about security just a bit more. We can stop running production code on operating systems that lost vendor support during the Obama administration. Let's just assume the next leaked NSA exploit is already in the hands of a criminal affiliate program writing better malware than the last one. But at the same time, it's true that our cybersecurity protocols and technologies are improving. Automated scanning has made exposure feel less like an if and more like a when. If we don't patch it up, it's going to be crawled and scanned, but there's plenty of hope. We just need to take software quality and security a little more seriously in the dev community. Anyhow, I hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, please support us by liking, subscribing, sharing, all of that. As you can tell, the fundamentals of networking, security, and non-sloppy code are very important to us here at boot.dev. And if they're important to you too, you'll love our courses. We've curated them to teach you the most valuable skills for career paths in backend development, DevOps, and data analysis. Plus, our courses are updated constantly, unlike on-prem operating systems, to make sure you're never learning out-of-date material. So make a free account and use code BOOTSTUBE for 25% off your first year of premium features, and never stop learning.